for you today is a little sequence you can do in supine to help nurture movement of the leg bone in the pelvis and pelvic stability, along with some stability through the SI joints. So what you're going to need is a strap. You could also use a TheraBand or ropes would work with this as well. And so what you're going to do is bring your strap into just make it into a big loop here. Okay, so you've got your strap, big loop. And then what you're going to do is simply to start, just take a second in supine here with your feet on the floor and just get familiar with where your pelvis is sitting. So you might palpate and feel the top of the iliac crest here and make your way around the front to the two most prominent bones at the front here, the ASIS bones, and then make your way down to the pubic symphysis and where that is. Kind of bring your hands down underneath to find your sit bones, feel your sacrum on the floor. So notice where your weight is resting and coming through your pelvis in this position and where the bones of your pelvis are relative to one another. So if you have your fingers on the AIS bones and the pubic symphysis, are they the same height? Are the AIS bones higher than the pubic symphysis, or is the pubic symphysis lower? Just kind of get a sense of where your pelvis is in space. Okay, and then feel the bones of the legs. Now, because our hip joints are ball and socket joints, our legs can move without our pelvis actually going anywhere, or without our spine moving, because our sacrum is the bottom of our spine and comes into the two bones that form our pelvis. It kind of sits in between them at the back. So you think of my hands being the two bones of the pelvis, then the sacrum comes in this open space. Okay, and so then these hip bones can do this. Okay, the pelvis can move this way. So just getting a sense of where you are in space. And what you're going to do is take the yoga strap, and we're going to put it around the heel so that it comes on the inside of the heel. Okay, so you've got the loop on the outside of the heel and then the two straps coming on the inside. And then I've just got my upper arms and elbows on the floor, and really my leg, the muscles of my hip are keeping my leg up so I could let go of this strap. You want to be quite curious about what's happening in your pelvis. If in order to have the leg up here, it's taking Herculean effort in the muscles of the hips. Okay, there's too much tension in the pelvis, if that's, and through your entire system, if that's what your experience is when you come here. So you want to do some things to settle the nervous system and settle your tissue out. Okay, so I want to use the muscles of the hip. So then all I'm going to do is have a soft bend in the knee, and I'm just going to slowly move the leg into flexion and out of flexion here, softening the front of the hip crease, feeling for where I can move the leg, but the pelvis and where I feel the weight through the pelvis doesn't change. Okay, and then I'm going to take the toes away, turn them away from the strap and then back. So I'm just nurturing some rotation. What you want to notice is that rotation coming from the hip, or are you really leading that from lower down the chain? If you're doing it from the hip, you're going to feel some muscles within the hip. It's not just about what's engaging in the hip. There's things that have to release. So again, if there's too much tension in there, you're going to feel the pelvis moving, or this movement will be very jittery and jerky. So I'm going to keep that slight rotation, and I'm going to adduct the leg. So My pelvis is staying here, and I'm going to start to take the leg across the body. Try not to lose that rotation. I want to notice if my other leg starts to do something to counterbalance for this one. And then I'll just take a few breaths there. And as there starts to be enough suppleness through the hips and the relationship of the leg and the pelvis improve, you'll be able to extend out that opposite leg, okay, and get it flat on the ground again without the pelvis changing position. So if in order to straighten that leg, the pelvis shifts and comes into likely more of an anterior tilt, you're not going to have a leg extension. You're going to keep the knee bent and the foot flat on the floor. Okay, so then with the leg adducted, just do a couple of rotations. And you can use the hands to kind of keep track of the foot compared to the hip. We want to think about the asynchrony between them. So think about whether the dog is wagging the tail or the tail is wagging the dog. So the muscles to rotate the leg are in here. They're not in our foot. Okay, so we want to be, there ought to be some movement here. Also when I'm rotating, if all I'm feeling is hip flexor, that's curious because the hip flexor is a vertical muscle and it does hip flexion and extension. It has no business trying to rotate the leg. So if it's really a hip flexor dominant process to rotate the leg here, then there's some other work that you need to do to bring some more balance to the muscles of the hip complex, the external rotators and the hip flexor and the psoas. Okay, and then we're going to take that strap and we're going to switch sides. So the loop will be on the inside of the heel and the straps will be on the outside of that leg. And so again, just come here, just kind of settle on the weight of the leg, settle into the hip socket. You might just bring the leg into and out of some flexion. So what I see a lot is when people go to bring this leg into flexion, what will happen is this whole piece will go. And really, we just want the leg moving in the hip socket. Pelvis stays nice and neutral. Okay, and then you can do some internal rotation of that leg. And if you need to use your hand to kind of find the involvement of the muscles of the hip, do that. Give yourself some kinesthetic awareness. You'll definitely start to feel some warmth in the hip if you're using the muscles of the hip. If you're using more below the knee and foot to drive the movement, what you'll see is the heel will actually come out quite far from the hip, both on internal and external rotation. So you'll see that the foot is really leading the movement, and if you looked up your leg, you wouldn't see the relationship of the hip, the knee, and the heel staying in a line or stacking. You'll see more of like the lower leg being a rudder and kind of flinging out past the knee and hip, okay? So we want to keep that stacking. We don't want that flinging or ruddering out of the lower leg. Okay, and then you're going to come to that internal rotation. And then we're going to start to take the leg some abduction. So we're moving out into the strap. You can also start to be curious about what your foot is doing. So as you adduct or adduct the leg, if you notice that the foot is everting or doing something other than sort of if you had the foot on the floor and you connect with the 3 points of the sole of the foot. So for a lot of people, it's that they need to find that big toe mound in the center of the heel here. Just let the weight of the leg settle into the hip socket. Okay, then I'm going to take that strap off. Bring both feet onto the ground. Okay, and just take a second here to notice the difference side to side. So you might notice that one side feels lower than the other, or more flesh of the buttock is in contact with the ground, or the hip just feels more spacious. I did my first side before I taped, so that's just a little sequence you can do using a strap or a rope or some longer TheraBand. You just want to make sure that you're not bringing tension to the upper body. So if you're tight through the shoulders and the chest, what you might want to do, or what you do want to do, is you'll want to create yourself something so that you can come down onto your back without tension through the neck or the shoulders, so that you're supported and work with the leg in the same way. This might even be I might even be more bolstered up. Okay, so have fun with that. Support the upper body as you work with the lower body and explore, play. Let me know what you notice, and you can reach me at dawn@bitbybitbodyworks.com. Thanks so much for joining.